Do you believe that the streets of Chicago would be safer if there were more uniformed police officers on the streets of Chicago?
I believe the city of Chicago.
He's like, I don't want to go down that street. I don't want to go down that street. Let me make a U-turn because I'm going to end up where I have to answer this question.
Chicago and cities across America would be safer if we actually had, affordable housing. Look,
okay,
I'm not saying that we don't.
That's not the question I asked.
I don't believe that we should narrow it down to just police officers, Joe, is what I'm saying.
My man said affordable housing. Affordable housing. Affordable housing is going to stop all these people that are shooting. These guys have switches. If you know what a switch is, that turns a semi-automatic into a fully automatic. Really? Affordable housing? Affordable housing when the property taxes are higher on the south and southwest side than they are on the north side? Affordable housing when all right, let's talk about Chi-Town, Chicago, Illinois, my kind of town, my home city, Chicago. Let's talk about that. I talked episodes back. I talked about how after DC, I was joking that Chicago was next, and Chicago has been next. So there's a lot of controversy. There's a lot of controversy. All the leaders in Illinois, Pritzker, everybody's coming out, and they're obviously against the feds, essentially National Guard going to Chicago. Now, my assessment of what's going on, I would say, is really two things. One, is Trump's move a little bit politically motivated? I would be lying if I said it wasn't. I think some of it is a little politically motivated. Obviously, by going into some of these Democratic cities and dealing with crime, it does make the Democrats look bad. And I think that there are definitely residents, particularly in Chicago, that are not happy about Chicago's crime rate and just the energy, the safeness or lack thereof of Chicago. And that's hard to deny. Now, on the flip side, the conversation about whether there's an actual crime problem, when you go into the numbers, and I'll get into the numbers in a minute. I mean, when you go into the numbers, it all depends on the conversation you're having, because when they go into the numbers, a lot of times they're dealing with the cities that have 1 million plus residents. And when you have less than 1 million, there's a different number. So what I say off the cuff is that, look, I've talked about cities like New York. I'm on the East Coast now, so I talk about New York, New Jersey, Chicago, LA. Memphis has a big problem. I mean, there is crime all over the country right now. Places, Baltimore too, where they say crime is down, but the types of crimes that are going on, to me, are more brazen, and I've talked about this before. But Chicago in particular, Chicago is one of those cities. I grew up in Illinois, and Chicago is one of those cities that has always had an issue with gangs, with violence. It's just that type of city.
Let's bring in Jackie Guider, whose cousin and son were killed by gun violence in Chicago, as well as Fox News political analyst Gianno Caldwell. You know him well. His brother was killed in a Chicago drive-by shooting in 2022. Thank you both for joining me on this tough topic to talk about, but we're grateful that you're willing to. Jackie, let me start with you. One of the things that I read that seems to be a pattern here, because we heard about it in D.C. as well, is that you talked to your cousin's mother, who said that she has not heard from anyone in authority, no detectives, no one from the investigation?
That's exactly right. I spoke with my cousin's mother, and she's very heartbroken. Not only did she lose her daughter, but there have not been anyone to have reached out to her to discuss what may have happened with her daughter's shootings. She have not heard of it from a detective. No one's reached out to her, and that's very common here in Chicago.
And apparently that is also the case in Washington, D.C., and probably other cities, as we start to unpack this a little bit more. Also, Jackie, you lost your son to gun violence. Can you tell us about that?
I did. August 16th of 2016, my 33-year-old son was murdered here in Chicago. And by the end of 2016, 780 people were actually murdered here in Chicago. My son being number like 343. That was in August, but by the time we got to the end of the year, we were at 780 murders here in Chicago. And the sad part is that most of these murders, the cases have not been solved. There have not been anyone to reach out to the parents of most of the victims. So this is like an ongoing thing here in the city of Chicago.
Giano, is this something that you have heard repeatedly as you've been willing to get out there, talk about it a little bit more, and put yourself in more of a leadership position in that city?
Yes, and I must say, Miss Jackie, I am so sorry for the loss of your precious son. And I am also very sorry that we both belong to a city and state that could give a damn about the loss of our family members. My prayers are with you. And I got to tell you, Dana, this is one of the most difficult conversations I think anybody can have, to put themselves on television and talk about the loss of their family members, especially when it seems to arrive on deaf ears when it comes to J.B. Pritzker, the governor, and Mayor Brandon Johnson. They don't have a problem with Donald Trump. They have a problem with the truth. The truth is there are many families throughout the state of Illinois and in Chicago that are hurting, people who are dying, families that are being slaughtered, their blood and treasure that is being laid out in the streets bare.
Crime. All right, let's talk about the numbers. So Chicago right now, let's just go through these numbers. So Brandon Johnson, he has touted that significant reductions in crime and violence in the past 2 years in Chicago. According to the most recent year-to-date statistics, homicides have dropped 31%, while shootings were down 37%. Total violent crime, meanwhile, has declined 26% over the past year. So let's look at this. So murders went from 370 in 2024 to 256 in 2025, so down 31%. Robberies down 33% from 5,700 to about 3,800. Burglaries are down, motor theft is down, and all that. So that's from 2024 to 2025. Now, these are numbers tallied. I'd have to assume right now we're in late August, almost September. So the year isn't even up yet, right? So there's still time for the final numbers of 2025. So currently they're down compared to 2024. Now, if we take a look, let me take a look at something here, right? So Trump has obviously said that Chicago has a crime problem, as well as DC and Baltimore and other places. But even though the numbers are down, right, let's take a look. While these numbers are accurate, there's no mention that Chicago saw its lowest number of homicides in 2019, and the murder count did not reflect the city's homicide rate. A study called the 2024 Homicide Statistics for 24 U.S. cities by the Rochester Institute of Technology showed that Chicago had the 8th highest homicide rate in the nation. Now, the study, which also mentioned by the White House, revealed that out of the 4 cities with populations over 1 million, Chicago has had the highest homicide rate for the past 7 years. Now, the reason why I mentioned that is that I did a video a while back talking about how Chicago had been the #1 murder city for 13 years at the time. Now, this was a story I followed. This was about a couple months ago. Now, again, like I said, numbers, I always tell people, numbers can be not manipulated, but numbers can be mentioned. It's all about the context you put around the number, right? Even if they claim the numbers are down, it's the perception of how people feel. And these are real people. If you lost a family member to gun violence, and there's a lot of stories in Chicago. I mean, there's many stories everywhere, but right now we're talking about Chicago, and Chicago is one of those places where there are plenty of gun violence stories. That guy, I forgot his name, but he was a rapper. He just got killed on Facebook Live 2 weeks ago, and I believe he was downtown, if I'm not mistaken. But he was in his car. Some dudes tried to take his chain, and they shot him. There was also the female rapper whose her release party got shot up on River North. So there are definitely, Chicago has always been somewhat of a violent city for the most part. And like I said, I think the Chicago got a couple of problems. Illinois in general has a lot of corruption issues, major overspending, ridiculous deficit, right? And they also have the fact that being a Democratic stronghold state and city as Chicago is, I think that the tides are turning, and I think people are starting to say, okay, it's not so much about they love Trump. I think people are starting to say, you know what, the Democratic Party is not necessarily the automatic answer. And, you know, the whole conversation about gerrymandering and stuff like that, you know, look, Illinois is a serious stronghold for Democratic Party. And I think that they're worried about seats. They're worried about the change in political landscape. And I think that, you know, Trump coming to Chicago, like I said, I think is somewhat political, but it's also the fact that, this president comes to the city, and, you know, obviously he's a Republican, and starts to help to get crime down or address the constituents' issues. That's the biggest thing. You start to address the constituents' issues, that's where the tide starts turning, because there's a lot of murders, like this gentleman said. A lot of them haven't been solved. A lot of them haven't even been followed up on. And there's just, you know, people are really tired of Chicago with the violence and the corruption. And Brandon Johnson's approval rating is extremely low. He's delusional, I mean, if he thinks that, you know, people love him as a mayor.
Mayor Johnson refused 5 separate times to answer when asked if he'd accept more police funding for 5,000 cops and whether or not it would help safety and law and order in Chicago. Watch him duck and dodge and weave. Take a look.
I'm curious, would you also like to get federal funding to help put 5,000 more cops on the street in Chicago? Would that help drive down crime?
Well, look, policing by itself is not the full strategy.
No, I understand that. You've talked about the other things you want. Would 5,000 more police officers on the street in Chicago be helpful to go along with all of those social programs that a lot of cities are engaging in and having success with?
Well, look, here's the best way I can put it, Joe, is that in the 90s when I was in high school, we had 3,000 more police officers and we had 900 people being murdered every single year in Chicago. It's just not policing alone. Of course, we want more detectives.
I know it's not policing alone.
But see, that's the thing. And, you know, again, this isn't even about Trump. This is just about leadership who is more worried about party and holding a seat. They're not really worried, because the problem is they don't want to take the help from the federal government, because they feel like it's going to make me look bad as a mayor, and it's going to make my party look bad because it's a Republican. You know, I would venture to say, again, I'm guessing, but if it was like a Kamala Harris or Barack Obama or any Democrat president who was offering help to Chicago, I would think that Brandon Johnson would gladly take it, to say, you know what, thanks for the help. Thanks for the help, Mr. President, for helping to, you know, even though our crime is down 31%, thanks for the extra help to make our city even safer. And this is the thing that everyday citizens actually care about. Times are really, really changing. And this whole trying to be a mayor, governor, president, where you're just talking around the block, you're not addressing problems directly, it doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work. And this guy is like he's like these guys answer questions like it's a throwback from 15, 20 years ago, where you can just kind of talk all over the place. This is the internet age now. Everybody is looking at everything. And look, there are direct problems with Chicago. Either you dealing with them or you're not.
We've invested in detectives.
Mr. Mayor, are you hearing what I'm saying? Would an additional 5,000 cops on the streets in Chicago help complement those programs to make Chicago safer?
Look, we are working hard to make sure that our police department is fully supported.
Of course.
This guy's like the... I don't even know, man. I don't know what to say about Brandon Johnson. I mean, I was talking about him before when they had the hearing on the illegal migrants, and talking about the price tag of what it costs Chicago to house and feed illegal migrants. And, you know, he just couldn't answer questions. And, you know, look, Chicago voters, at the end of the day, Chicago voters will have to look at the next go round and say, well, who am I going to vote for? And I think things are going to change. It's not just about party, but people are starting to look and say, we're not going to necessarily just automatically vote a Democrat in next time. And I think that's what these politicians are really, really scared of. I don't think they really care about crime on that level. I think that, Pritzker, I think they'd rather just go down with the ship. To be honest with you, they're like, I'd rather go down with the ship than to pass any level of leadership over to any other party. And this is just a dangerous thing that I'm seeing here. And again, if you go into the crime numbers, I mean, again, you can always go into them and kind of look at them, but look at the crime numbers and try to understand the context surrounding the numbers. When they say this is the top city for crime or this crime is down, they do things based on, every 100,000 or this city who has this many people. So it's important to understand that. But generally, I would say that even if crime is down in Chicago, it's still high compared to what it probably should be. Same thing in B-more. Same thing in New York too. Right now they're having a real tough time. The Democrats are reluctant to endorse Mandami. I'm gonna play a quick piece of this too real quick because I think this is interesting. No, you know what? I'm not gonna play this. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Is it all political? What do you think? I know there's some people that vehemently hate Trump and think that this is all political, and then there's some on the ground in Illinois who and in DC who actually believe that this is better and it's helpful to help drive crime down. I don't think it's a long-term solution, like I said in other videos in relation to DC, but you have a president who's trying to address crime is a real thing, and there's a lot of victims in Illinois who are going through a lot. So it's easy to say that this is all political and Trump just want to do martial law and all the crazy things I've been hearing. I get it, but if you lost someone to gun violence, right? If you lost someone you love close to you in gun violence, then how would you feel? You might feel happy that the federal government is trying to help with crime in your city if you lost somebody. So it's all about perspective, where you're coming from. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Crucial Combo.